Hey watercolor wizards, Hajra here. Today I'm going to be showing you how to do abstract salt effects and stippled sparkly illusion effects in watercolor while painting a stylized peacock for the current bird round for the Animal Artist Collective. Thanks for parking your brushes here and let the epic painting adventures begin. I'm starting with my freehand pencil drawing all inked up with a coffee marker, which is a lighter brown than the sepia-like chocolate marker in the Zig Rider range. And this is Arch's hot press paper with Sennelier watercolors for the paints. You can see another one of my videos where I swatch the colors I'm using in a little travel tin, and also another video where I swatch the entire range of Sennelier watercolors. I started wet and wet with a bleedy abstract background in phthalo green light and forest green. I wanted the background to be one of the 5 colors that I was using for the peacock. I chose the greens because they were used the least in the peacock and not much in any of the border areas. And I just love how vibrant all my Sennelier and Schmincke paints are. They're just a joy to see on the paper. The Sennelier paints are very creamy and soft due to the honey binder. So I dropped in the greens wet and wet, and while they were still wet, I adjusted them a bit, because the buckling and the tilt of the paper as I was painting was causing certain pooled color areas, and I wanted to disperse those pigment puddles more randomly. So I just dabbed at them with my brush to actively move them out of those warped paper areas. Now, if you like where your paint settles in buckles or warps, then that's perfectly fine, but if you need to move it around, that definitely can be done while it's still wet. I also used a lighter and darker green in different areas so I could get a bit more value and temperature contrast than if I just used one green. You might notice that I used a lighter green around the head and neck area of the bird so that when his head area is painted in a darker blue later, it stands out more than if I had just used the darker green in the background there. When I needed to get into the smaller areas up to the bird's border lines, I made sure the paint edges elsewhere were still wet or blended out to a soft edge with water because I didn't want any awkward hard edges in the background anywhere. And I decided I wanted some salt effects for more visual interest in the abstract background as well. And pretty much any kind of salt will work, whether you buy it for silk painting or you have your table salt or kosher salt. But the coarser the salt is, the more water it'll take for it to break down. And the finer salt you have, the quicker it'll break down to give you effects. And the little starburst will be bigger if you had bigger pieces of salt and smaller if you have finer pieces of salt. Paint has to be wet with visible water for the salt to activate and work. If the paint's about to dry, then nothing much will happen. On the other hand, if you drop the salt into a deep puddle of water, it'll just dissolve too much and you'll get no effects that way either. So the paper has to be moderately wet when you sprinkle in the salt. If you err on the side of the paper being a bit drier and some of the salt doesn't activate, you can always brush or spray in some more water gently to make the salt effects take off. And you'll see me adding in more water in areas where some of my salt didn't activate. But further effects do depend on whether your paints are staining or not, since staining paints like the forest green I used won't budge very much once they set down. So the majority of my salt effects occurred earlier when the paint was more fresh. When I go to paint the peacock itself, it'll be switching to wet on dry painting because I need a dry paper surface to keep the paint in the little lines and sections. Any soft effects I want within the peacock will be created with softening select paint edges with a damp, clean brush. Wherever I put streaks of Quinn Gold over the light yellow on the wing feathers, you can see me come back with a damp brush to soften the lines out. It wasn't hard to put all the yellow tendrils in, but it'll take a bit of time and patience since the quilly feather sections are also slender. Make sure you rub all the excess salt off the paper after it dries so your paper is smooth all over. If you aren't painting anything further in the salted area, that should be enough, and that's what I did here. But if you intend on going over that area again with more paint without reactivating any salt remnants, I've learned that first rubbing off the salt when the paper dries and following up by erasing over the area with a soft eraser to pick up all the remaining salt crystals takes care of any salt that doesn't rub off by hand. And you are going to want to get the last of those salt crystals, even the ones that are invisible, otherwise they'll just reactivate when you put more paint over the top. And random salt effects will usually be pretty fantastic, but if there's an area that you don't like for some reason due to balance or look or whatever, you can just reduce or modify the effects there with just more wet and wet paint over the top. Once I have all of my yellow base areas done, I return to the head, neck, and body area to add an ultramarine deep blue, along with the 2 greens and the 2 yellows where I want them. I painted in the base local colors wet on dry, then went over the top with deeper colors applied wet and dry with blended edges. Some of the edges were blended in a smooth gradient, while others were stipple blended with little dots of color. Check out my real-time video on various hard and soft edges to see more of this. In this case, the stippling strokes I used added a sparkly quality to my peacock, which is what I wanted to emulate the shimmer of a real iridescent peacock. Finally, I come back to add highlights, and I'm going to stipple those in with a gel pen, which is basically white gouache and a stick. The layered stippling gave me the sparkly illusion effect that I wanted, and I've used this sort of stippling highlight effect on painting shimmery fabrics, ornaments, metallic ribbons, jewelry, and who knows what else. I find white highlights to be really addictive, and I probably overdo them once I get going on a piece. But it just adds such an ambiance of pixie dust or stardust, just sparkle and magic and fantasy in dot form. And if some of your dots go down too bright or too large, you can use a damp brush to dull them or wipe them away completely, but only while the white paint is fresh. I'm going to pop in the eye spots in the feathers in green, blue, and some quin gold wet on dry. It will be the last of the greens and blues for this piece. Then to finish off this bird, I'll just be stippling in quinacridone gold dots and then white highlight dots over that to get the tail feathers, the way I did with the body and wing feathers. Don't hesitate to smudge some of the dots a bit with a damp clean brush to get varied intensities in the white or the dark yellow. I mostly do animal paintings more realistically, but sometimes it's fun to do a stylized animal that is less realistic, and this is definitely one of those projects. My original artwork was inspired by the Art Nouveau and Art Deco style of mogul jewelry I saw in an exhibit at the Legion of Honor earlier this year, which is why this peacock looks like it could be an ornate brooch. I was initially set to say that my bird is not a scientifically correct peacock in his coloration, but after I researched it further, it turns out that I don't have to actually. So let me explain. There are 3 extant species of peafowls: the Indian peafowl of the Indian subcontinent, the green peafowl of Southeast Asia, and the Congo peafowl from the Congo Basin. The Congo and Southeast Asian species are also threatened and endangered respectively. These birds are in the genera Pavo and Afropavo under Phasianidae, the pheasant family. Of the 3 species, the Indian peafowl is arguably the most showy and the most commonly associated with a generic peacock image, and the Congo peafowl is the least decorative and with the shortest tail feathers. The green peafowl is middling in showiness yet retains striking colors and patterns, and both genders of the Southeast Asian species are similarly colorful, unlike the other 2 species where the male peacock is showy while the female peahens are not. Now, apart from the dominant color genes and color distribution of these 3 species, there are many color variations that can occur due to recessive genes. This includes the leucistic white peacocks, which are not albinos. Albino peacocks are actually super rare, but these leucistic peacocks cannot distribute the pigment they make to their feathers. And then there's the dozens of other color variations caused by other recessive genes. You can check out photos of 24 variations on this website I found from a peafowl breeder. So the peacock I'm painting looks similar to some of the recessive color varieties I saw there, including the Beaufort bronze, the cameo black shoulder, the opal, or the purple black shoulder. All these recessive variations had bronzy tan or brown tail feathers and darkish bluish head neck areas like the peacock I've painted. I'm actually not totally surprised because I've read so often that nothing we imagine as artists hasn't already been done by Mother Nature. All the colors and shapes and textures we use are sourced from the amazing world we observe around us. I mean, even a mermaid and unicorn are just existing organism parts that we have collaged together. So even less shocking that nature actually produced a peacock in the colors I used, though I admit it was a pleasant find. And when we are looking at the dominant color genes, the resplendent feathers of peafowls are not primarily pigments, but due to vibrant iridescent plumage as with many other birds. This means that optical interference Bragg reflections produce the colors we see. Because the interference effect depends on light angles rather than pigments, they shimmer metallically and change as the bird moves. There have been many theories and studies to understand why the male peacock has such showy plumage. One explanation is that the largest, showiest males with the most eye pattern feathers and longest plumage are the most genetically fit since they are able to survive despite having long, cumbersome, and vivid tails and being non-camouflaged from predators. This has been supported by certain studies where trimmed males with fewer eye spot feathers were less desirable to females. Furthermore, naturally more ornamental males have been shown to better avoid predators and also father larger chicks. Not to mention that peacocks have one of the prettiest bird mating dances around. Peafowl are omnivores and will eat all plant parts, insects, arthropods, and even small reptiles and amphibians, basically anything they can get into their beaks. A male can fertilize eggs at 2 years when he has at least a few eye spot feathers, though he doesn't get his first long tail trained till 3 years. Then he'll lose it entirely every late summer and grow it back annually. Peafowls can live more than 50 years, so that's a lot of tail feathers coming and going. Because of their beauty, peacocks have been visually significant in religious, cultural, and political symbolism, fiction, and also art. Like the myth of Greek goddess Hera putting the 100 eyes of her faithful dead guard Argus onto a peacock's tail. Perhaps this is why early Christians adapted the peacock to symbolize the eyes of an all-seeing god and associated the bird with paradise and immortality. Other groups have used the peacock to symbolize paradise and eternity as well, while others attach it to royalty, beauty, vanity, or creativity. It's definitely a bird that attracts a lot of attention one way or another, and also deserves our protection, and that sort of awareness is just what the Animal Artist Collective is about. The other participating artists in this AAC round include founders in Liquid Color and Jennifer Charlie, as well as Sade Saves the Day, Meow Meow Kapow, Amy Howard Art, Mary Sanchez, Visual Mind, Katie Vaughn, and me. If you know my channel already, then thanks for being one of my watercolor wizards, and if you don't and have found your way here as a result of the Animal Artist Collective, then welcome to my channel and I hope you subscribe. I work in watercolor, gouache, and ink, and create infodance videos and posts on YouTube, Skillshare, and Patreon. And please make sure you check out the other videos from this round of the Animal Artist Collective. The links to the other participating artist channels are below in my description box, and you can also find out some more information about the AAC down there. Well, wizards, hope you enjoyed painting this vibrant watercolor peacock with me. Hopefully this video and my artwork for the AAC will help raise awareness and support for wildlife. You can buy this peacock from me by contacting me via email or messaging me on Instagram or Patreon, and I will donate 50% of my proceeds to the World Wildlife Fund or the National Wildlife Federation, two organizations that I have donated to annually for more than a decade. If you want a more affordable art print, decor, or stationery of my peacock instead, it'll be in my Redbubble shop, which I have actually finally updated after more than a year of lagging behind, so check it out. Please like, comment, subscribe, and check out my website link, Skillshare, and Patreon page to support my art and art channel below. Thanks for parking your brushes here, and wishing you all epic watercolor adventures.